I'd like to call this joint meeting to order. Williamsburg James City County School Board to order. Ms. Serza, will you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Cardasco.
She is running late. Her son is ill. She'll be here.
Ms. Emanuel.
Here.
Mr. Fuentes.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. Nichols.
Here.
Dr. Prater.
Here.
I call to order this meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors for the purpose of a joint meeting. Mr. Minow, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Lennon? Here. Mr. Eisenhower? Here. Mr. Kennedy? Here. Ms. Jones?
Here. I'll borrow my gavel.
I'd like to call the James, or the City of Williamsburg.
Come on over.
Come on over. We are colleagues here.
That's right.
Williamsburg City Council to order for this joint meeting. Mr. Tuttle, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Foster.
Here.
Ms. Newsom. Here. Mayor Holman.
Here.
Mr. Friday. Here. Ms. Pons. Here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming together this morning, and thank James City County for having us at this beautiful law enforcement center. And I believe the chief said he would be happy to give anyone a tour that would like it. So if you would like to after the meeting, please let him know. With that, we are going to start with the school division update. Dr. Constantino.
Last year, thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
Last year, my first joint meeting was about 17 minutes after I became superintendent. And so it was a little bit of a whirlwind. But what I clearly heard from the group was that there was an interest in an overview of the school division. There was an interest in understanding, not droning on about data, but looking at where we are academically, looking at things that we can celebrate, and looking at our challenges and tying those things to long-term plans and budgets. So what I've done this morning is to put together what I'm calling a little mini state of the division, try to not take a whole lot of time. Apologize to you. I'm going to read this morning with my penchant for rambling. Trust me, it's in everyone's best interest that I read this and not try to ramble through it. We'll certainly take some questions at the end of it. I want to begin with a snapshot of our most recent academic performance, where we've done well, where there's still room for improvement. I want to talk a little bit about a few of the exciting things you may not know that are happening in our classrooms. It will conclude by framing the budget situation, taking a look into the future. Every discussion of academic performance requires some data. We don't have the time necessary to explore all of the data available to us, so I've chosen those items for which we are measured at the state and national levels. Continuing a trend that has been consistent in recent years, W-JCC outperformed the Commonwealth and the nation in its most recent SAT scores. As you can see, state and national scores dipped in 2011, but we remain ahead of the curve. The next slide represents a trend analysis of mathematics in our school division. The composite shown here by major subgroup shows a positive trend in mathematics achievement. However, in 2011, the annual measurable objective, or AMO, was raised to 85% from 79%. The red numbers in the graph represent the group or groups not meeting the new objective, even though their progress has increased. The AMO is how AYP is calculated in the state of Virginia. This is an example of why it is more important to us to determine if our students are improving and not just be completely focused on a manufactured objective. Advanced placement is an area that we have seen excellent growth. In many cases, as the number of test takers increases, scores fall. In our case, we've increased the number of students taking tests represented by the first set of bars, the total number of tests taken by those students represented by the second set of bars, and those tests scoring a 3 out of 5 or better. This is the trend over the last 3 years. As I think I've stated consistently since my arrival, my biggest area of focus for improvement is in reading. You will note on this trend analysis we're seeing a bit of what I term to be a flatlining, and in one case a slight decrease in reading achievement. In just a few minutes, we'll be sharing with you the steps we're taking to put into place to reverse this trend and sharpen the focus for reading throughout the division. I'll also add very quickly that we have changed the way, or are beginning to change over the way we look at data in the division This kind of graphic representation of trends over time help us to determine what direction we're going in, and also keeps us focused on the various subgroups that we have to maintain focus on. We certainly can put one number up there and say, hey, look how well we're doing. I think it's important that we drill down a little bit to say, yes, we're doing well, but we could be gaining ground here, we could be losing ground there. So much of the data, as we turn over our data systems and try to improve our data systems, we're moving toward more linear representation of where we are to try to understand what we need to do to put continuous improvement in place. I want to talk just for a minute about graduation rates. There's a lot of attention paid each year to graduation rates from high schools throughout the Commonwealth. A couple of years ago, the Department of Education reworked the way it reported graduation rates to more accurately reflect a true picture of what happens to students who begin in the 9th grade and work their way through graduation, which the state refers to as a cohort. In our most recent year, 87% graduated in 4 years. Another 5% went on to earn a GED, 2% are still enrolled for another year or another course, and 4% are either on long-term absence due to illness or we've been unable to determine their status. That means out of the original 883 students in this cohort, only 1%, 9 students, dropped out of school. And I share that with you because you'll hear me use the term completion rates as opposed to graduation rates, because in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the graduation rate and the completion rate are not the same number, and it's extremely confusing. There are days when I'm not sure I understand it, but what's most important is that sometimes people look at that 87% and they say, gosh, you know, only an 87% graduation rate. Not really. So I wanted to go under the hood a little bit just to give you a little bit of that information. 9 students is still too many, but it's much better than I think what some people glean from when going to the state website and reading that information. As you know, Virginia has applied for a waiver from No Child Left Behind. After this year, we predict that the manner in which data is collected, reviewed, and shared, as well as how schools are evaluated, will be completely modified. AYP will be gone, and in its place, a new growth model. We're cautiously optimistic that this new process will be a better representation of our students' achievement, but so far, early glimpses of what this system will measure seem to continue to center solely on SOLs. I'd like to talk for a minute about the use of technology in our schools. Always get a lot of questions about that. I believe we're on the road to equipping our classrooms with the technology that our students are already using at home. In fact, as one of the leaders in the region in instructional technology, we've become a must-visit model for school divisions considering technology areas still looking to upgrade for instructional use. The award-winning Instructional Technology Standard Package includes a variety of streaming content resources such as Discovery Education and Safari Montage, which feature video clips that are searchable by subject, by state, by national and state SOL standards. The use of sound field amplification microphones, such as the one you see here, including the one being demonstrated by Jim Nichols at the recent Read Across America at Matthew Whaley, and of course, all manner of personal response systems and handheld devices that are part of every student's world, including such items as iPods, iPads, Nooks, Kindles, and Androids. Over the past year, increasing growth in intra and internet resources used by faculty, students, and parents has supported greater instructional opportunities for everyone. Our school board has adopted a long-range technology plan reflective of the 21st century instruction. We expect to see a great increase in handheld devices in our classroom during the coming years. As they currently do, students using these devices will access appropriate and engaging content provided by our curriculum and instructional technology experts in ways that are personally relevant and instructionally meaningful to those children. We believe that the appropriate use of technology plays a key role in the ability of students to discriminately find, manage, and make meaning out of a glut of information our society currently experiences. This ability is clearly part of our journey to achieve premier status. We continue to try and streamline and improve data environments that support the efficient operation of the school division. We are proposing no reductions in these areas in this budget this year. The division is part of a 17-district consortium which garnered a state grant to build and improve data systems through the development of data warehouse processes. We continue to work toward implementing this grant to improve our data systems. We're also in the early phases of a major upgrade to our student information systems, which will go live for 2012-13 school year. This upgrade, as well as the data warehouse project, are tied together to take advantage of the latest Oracle Business Intelligence tools, which will allow our leaders and teachers to have immediate access to critical data in formats that make sense, in formats that are usable, and formats that are instructive. Some data presentation capabilities that we'll see in the coming year are configurable dashboards, data drill downs, and individual profile data presentations. I just add that this is a huge step forward for us because we simply have not had this capability in the past, and being part of the consortium and using those grant funds are going to move us ahead much more quickly in our ability to capture and analyze and use data immediately. I want to go back to reading for a minute because that is an area that I've highlighted several times. I've placed a significant emphasis on reading and literacy. In our ongoing effort to close reading achievement gaps, there are 2 reading strategies that are paying dividends, one of which is relatively new and showing some promise. The first is reading recovery, a first-grade reading intervention program designed to help struggling readers achieve grade-level status in 12 to 20 weeks. Identified students receive 30 minutes of daily intensive instruction on a one-to-one basis. Division-wide, this has allowed us to accelerate over 100 students each year, which equates to approximately 5 classrooms of students. Our school district is in its 22nd year of reading recovery training site, where we also provide training for staff of York County Public Schools as well. Our 5-year reading and language arts plan for continuous improvement, which was implemented for the first time this year, provides a screener who assesses the reading ability of students in grades 3, 6, and 9 to determine if the student is reading above, at, or below grade level. The program also features an assessment of writing skills at all grade levels that determines the student's writing ability through organization, the student's ability to write in his or her own words, word choice, sentence fluency, conventions, and presentation. Another area that I chose to share with you this morning is career and technical education. I often get a lot of questions about career and technical education, and there are many folks who stop me and say, you know, why are you cutting, or why don't we do more in career and technical education? So I thought it might be worth a few minutes just to share with you what we really do in terms of career and technical education for our students. In my opinion, we offer a full slate of courses in partnership with Thomas Nelson Community College and ODU, ranging from business information, business management, technology, health, and medical sciences. In addition, to encourage exploration of different careers and interests, we have thriving student clubs and organizations that specialize in a single topic. A youth career cafe has opened at Thomas Nelson Community College that offers workshops covering resume writing, interviewing skills, and how to complete a job application. A medical explorers post is underway with the assistance of Centera Williamsburg Regional Medical Center, where students learn about various careers in healthcare. And just yesterday, a number of W-JCC students attended the annual Youth Career Expo in Hampton, where students were able to visit with numerous representatives in the worlds of business, industry, and education. Another area in which our division is playing a leadership role is providing healthy meals for students every day in our cafeterias. Our School Health Initiative program, better known as SHIP, and its funding partner, the Williamsburg Community Health Foundation, have made great strides in improving the healthfulness of our students' meals. In addition to the increased selection of healthy food choices for students and the addition of healthy vending machines, our program allows for specialists to work with our teachers, developing curriculum that can enhance the SOLs with a focus on health and wellness. I want to give you an update on our strategic plan process. Perhaps you've read about it. When I became superintendent, the question I most often asked, and I asked the staff, is how can we best serve the students facing an uncertain future with steadily declining budgets? It's a big challenge, but one that I believe we can meet with the help of our partners and community. That help has already begun in a big way with the first steps with the strategic plan. We've undertaken this task to come to a shared vision about where public education should be headed in the next 5 years and beyond. Starting in December, with the help of the Public Consulting Group, we have formed a 15-member steering committee made up of community leaders. We have conducted more than 20 public hearings and focus groups, as well as an online survey to get almost 3,000 thoughts and ideas from members of the community. The steering committee will continue to meet. We'll be sharing the first set of draft goals with the school board on March 20th, and the plan will be ready for implementation on July 1st. I hope that the community will know that it played a major role in shaping the future of public schools in our community. I also like to talk for a minute about organizational effectiveness. This is something that I've shared with the school board, and I've chosen to share it with you this morning because I think it speaks to the future of how we hope to do business. One of the lessons that we learn in financial times like these is how to assess what we have and determine how we can retool or reorganize to meet the needs of our students and save money. You'll hear in a few minutes how we were able to reduce our expenditures by approximately $4 million and keep our organization as intact as possible to continue toward the goal of a premier school division. In addition to the $2.7 million that has been reduced from centralized services over the past few years, another $600,000 has been reduced in this budget as a result of restructuring and retooling of services. In order to develop and maintain an organization that is efficient as possible, I have indicated to the school board my intention of implementing a performance management system commensurate with the 2012-2013 school year. The Baldrige criteria for performance excellence provides a systems perspective for understanding performance management and organizational effectiveness. The criteria reflect validated leading-edge management practices used in business and industry against which an organization can measure itself. With their acceptance nationally and internationally as the model for performance excellence, the criteria represent a common language for sharing best practices amongst organizations. All actions point toward results, a composite of student learning and process outcomes, customer-focused outcomes, workforce-focused outcomes, leadership and governance outcomes, and budgetary, financial, and market outcomes. The first most critical piece of this process is a measurable strategic plan, which we will have on July 1st. I believe our implementation and dedication to a measurable performance operations system is going to further enhance not only our outcomes, but our efficiencies as well. Most critically, though, is the need for future change with regard to our instructional philosophy and methodology. The biggest issue, in my opinion, that we have in education is not whether or not we have a common core standards. This is not the first time a country has tried to use a national set of standards. I think we can look to England and look at the failures of the English public education system when they tried it. Apparently we didn't do that. I don't think the issue is SOLs. I don't think the issue is testing. I think the biggest issue that we face is whether or not we are going to be able to continue to engage our students. And if we cannot engage them, then the rest of it simply is not going to happen. Education has fundamentally changed. When we went to school, we were given a large body of information, and we had to master at least 65% of it in order to meet the minimum diploma requirements. That has all changed. Today, education is driven by standards. It's not just about attaining knowledge, but also applying that knowledge to various scenarios and connecting it to the real world. You cannot master 70% of a standard. You either master it or you don't. Averaging grades and mastering standards are simply incongruent. If we maintain a status quo mentality with regard to our instructional methodology and our teaching and learning environments, then it's quite possible we'll be doing future students a grave disservice. The most recent literature available regarding the trends in business and industry suggests that employee value is no longer defined as, quote, I am good at my job, but rather is now defined by the question, how much demand is there for my skills? The world is changing and the labor force is changing with it. This is the process of increasing specialization, a process which naturally takes place in high-performing organizations. In today's high-performing companies, people now take on roles, not jobs. They're responsible for tasks and projects, not simply functions. I want to make sure that our schools are designed to meet these market and labor needs. Students today and in the future will not learn in neat bunches of 25 or 30 or in rows of 4 or 5. They will not be engaged by filling in worksheets or taking a myriad of tests to prepare them for other tests. While it is certainly our intention to comply with state requirements, we can no longer subscribe to the notion that a pig can be fattened by weighing it more often. In W-JCC, we are in the process of redefining our questions. Question number 1, what do we want? Question number 2, what are we willing to do to get it? And question number 3, are our students learning? Creating the metrics to answer these questions will not only allow us to ensure an environment of continuous improvement, but also help us meet the growing challenges of the future. Rigor and standards are being continuously raised. For example, last night the school board heard about the new, more rigorous math standards. The state superintendent has predicted a significant decrease in math scores across the state as a result of the implementation of these new rigorous standards, all designed to meet the waiver requirements from No Child Left Behind, as well as fend off Virginia's involvement in the Common Core standards. The new standards, which will be tested for the first time, which are being tested for the first time this year, require elementary students to perform multi-step equations on a computer, get as many as 2 or 3 answers in order to finally find a final answer to a question. Most testing has moved to an online environment. There will be no more pencils, no more bubble sheets. We're going to have to redefine our learning environments to meet these new standards, and that's only the beginning. I'd like to come back and talk with you more specifically about the future as it relates to our capital improvement and long-term ideas, but certainly we'll take any questions about my, hopefully, as brief as possible overview of our school system.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have two. One's kind of a wonky question, and the other's more educational philosophy. When you look at advanced placement tests, I mean, if you dig down a little bit more, as you talk about doing, what would it look like if we took percent of our number of test takers that do 3 or better over total test takers? And how do we compare to other divisions when you do that? I mean, that could be a measure of the success of the AP program. Do we do that?
Well, the short answer is no. In the new development of our data systems, we've talked about, right now, the state nor the service that does AP, I can't think of their name off the top of my head. ETS. Neither one of those people provides us with any comparative data. So whatever we get, we would have to go and mine on our own. So as part of our new data performance system, understanding that everything means more when we compare it to something, AP has been that one area where we've had nothing to compare it to because it doesn't come out that way. So as we design these new systems to capture data, what we're trying to do is do exactly that. You know, we're glad that there's an increase in 3, 4, or 5. Has there been an increase in 0, 1, and 2? Has there been an increase in the number of students who choose not to take the test or not to have their test counted? They have the right to simply bubble a place on their test and not have it counted. It's almost impossible to determine who's done that because ETS won't tell us. They will only tell us, so we have to go back and figure out systems in place. So it's a very valid question, and I hope in the future, when we look at AP information, that we'll have a little bit more comparative data than we do now. The only good news we have is that it's trending in the right way.
The second question deals with, you've talked a lot about technology. In reading about sort of lots of different school systems are doing and what have you, it seems to me that there appears to be a trend in some school systems to move away from using technology very much, particularly in the early years, hoping that kids learn to think before they get to the technology. What's your philosophy about that? How do you think about that? And what does that mean for the way we might think about sort of what happens at our grade, K through 3 in years to come?
I think that's a great question. I think, first of all, my opinion, you asked me what my opinion is. Exactly. My opinion is that technology can be very seductive, but it doesn't replace pedagogy. It doesn't replace methodology. It doesn't replace the needs of kids in terms of interactions with teachers and learning. So what I see happening in our schools, and as we formulate our strategic plan, what I see happening is that at the elementary levels, technology is being used more for supporting student learning, whereas at the secondary level, I think that these kids are using it more for exploration of learning, where they're going to get information. Elementary kids are using technology to reinforce what they're learning in the classroom. I don't necessarily have a concern with that. I think that my bigger concern, as I said before, is we can't, public education, and we are no different than every other school system, we're going to struggle to maintain student engagement when they leave us and power up and turn their phones on and their iPads on and their computers on and everything else on, and they do everything digitally, and they connect with their parents through instant message. And then we come in and we tell them to shut everything off, put it away, and here's a worksheet. We're not going to win that battle. And so we have to find some happy medium. And I think that right now, what we're doing at the elementary level and what we're trying to do at the secondary level, although I will say that we're in the infancy of some of this stuff, is to say, let's support learning in the primary years because critical thinking and brain development is absolutely essential. And then let's look, as kids get older, into using it as an augmented tool so that they can capture information that they otherwise wouldn't capture.
Mr. Nichols?
The other component is that all of the SOLs are online, or moving online. And so we also have to train the children how to use the computer technology in order to respond to the questions that are online.
You know, I'll have to tell you a very quick story about that, because that's a valid point. Many years ago, long before there were ever computers or SOLs, I remember as a high school principal talking with a family in a meeting about a young person who was not performing well on tests. And it was a special education student. And so the special education team went back to try to figure out where was the hole in this individual learning process that didn't allow this child, because the child was performing well in class, did their homework, did everything they were supposed to do. It gets to a test, and the kid tanked. Well, what happened was that everything that the child practiced, think for a minute back to school, a math problem where the teacher says, show your work. And you show all of your work, and the teacher looks at that work and grades it. When the test came, the student was being asked to take that answer and put it over here. And they simply couldn't do it. They didn't know how to do that. And so when we figured that very simple thing out, test scores started to rise, because that is a function of some disabilities for special education students. The same thing holds true with online testing. It's not like, okay, we're going to take the test on the computer now. It's very different. Now we have to help the kids understand. Last night we heard about dragging and dropping and doing all kinds of things that if I have a fine motor coordination skill issue, I am going to be very, very challenged by the ability to drag an answer across a computer screen on a standardized test. So I think those are all important issues that we're working, and our teachers work with them every day.
Are there any further questions before you're going to move into the superintendent's budget?
Yep.
I forgot to mention at the top that we are hoping to adjourn as close to 10 o'clock as we can.
Yes, ma'am.
So.
You have in front of you the copy of the superintendent's budget. I am going to ask Scott to do what he does best and to take you through the pieces of the operations budget. Let me say to you that in some sort of context, we understood the budget issue that we faced, and we understood that we had to look at a lot of different things in our school division. In many cases, my philosophy in going into this, and the fact that I had to cut $200 million out of a budget in the last 3 years was a little bit of a help to approaching this. What we're trying to do is there a way to reduce our organization in such a way that we don't kill something off? Is there another way we can do something? Do we have to do something this particular way? And so, because when the budget crisis is over, and I believe the day will come when it is over, we still have to be an intact organization. So we've tried to make reductions, more reductions than eliminations. In the areas where we have made eliminations, I'm convinced we have alternatives to put into place that will garner what we need to get in terms of our kids and our programs. I'm going to let Scott talk with you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the budget, and certainly either one of us will then answer any questions that you might have about that.
Good morning, everybody. My comments will be brief in the objective of recessing at 10 o'clock. However, I have learned through various public meetings that it is a good idea to make sure that everybody has the documents and that they can quickly grab them. So what I've done was I have made multiple colors in terms of different documents. So if I say green document, please turn to that and the like. So hopefully that'll help. I'm sorry if they're colorblind, then that's going to be the issue. Thank you, sir.
Trying to add a little levity.
That's right. You have a copy of the presentation that we presented to the school board on February 21st. I have also learned not to present new data to another governing body that the school board doesn't have, so I'm going to use the same document as we had before. In terms of the budget process, just want to remind this group that the administration and school board go through an extensive process in terms of preparing a budget document. It is something that we take very seriously. We evaluate various pros and cons to recommendations that go before the school board. Our staff are very much part of that process in terms of cost center managers, which are building principals and department heads and so on. The superintendent works very closely with the school board, seeks direction in terms of budget goals and so on. And I think every year we make improvements in that area in terms of facilitating that conversation. So the presentation or the budget that the superintendent put before the school board goes through an extensive process and vetting process before it's presented. In terms of budget overview, next year's budget is scheduled to be or proposed to be $111.9 million. This represents a 1.3% increase over fiscal year 2011-12. I know that many will ask, well, you have a larger budget than the current year. What's the problem? But we'll see what some of those challenges are in terms of increased costs in terms of ERS, et cetera. In terms of FTEs, it does include, unfortunately, a reduction of about 47 positions within the budget. The superintendent has, and the rest of the administration has taken very seriously the fact that in this difficult financial time, both for the city and the county and for the Commonwealth and the nation, that the school system had to do its due diligence in terms of looking at making reductions. We knew that we could not just ask the governing bodies just for the full increase to cover our costs, and as a result, under the superintendent's leadership, we have made various proposals in terms of reductions. Unfortunately, these are real people, these are real positions, and as the superintendent alluded to, about $600,000 in additional administrative reductions. That's in addition to the $2.7 million that we have reduced over the past 3 years in that area. So I just want to highlight that for you. In terms of enrollment, we are projecting enrollment at 10,795, which is about 124 students over our actual enrollment for September 2011, and that represents an increase of 1.2%. Our overall budget per pupil spending is about $10,000 under this particular budget proposal. Very quickly, in terms of revenue, recognizing the significant investment that the localities make, your contribution is from local sources about 66%, and you would add to that about the 9.5% that comes through sales tax that you appropriate to us as well. So we recognize the contribution and the significant investment, again, that the community makes, the local community makes in terms of education. The state contributes about 24% of our local revenue, or of our overall revenue, rather. We wish that was more significant, but it's not. And as a result, we understand that the localities bear the burden of most of our budget as we go forward. In terms of a breakdown, you have a white sheet, which is a budget summary. Within that sheet, within that particular document, and we're not going to go through all of that, but if you could turn to page 24. There is a summary in terms of revenue. I will note that the local increase request is $2.8 million. Right now, the split between the city and county is not definitive. It is a draft document, subject to change, so those percentages by the locality might change as we go forward. But overall, in terms of the school system, we're requesting a $2.8 million or almost a $2.9 million increase in terms of local revenue. Under the governor's proposed budget, our revenues would go up by approximately $300,000. We'll see what the final General Assembly actions are in regard to the budget, but at least the time being, we're using $300,000 as an increase. You will note, as I know that we had noted throughout the budget process last year and over the last couple of years, stimulus funds are going away or have gone away. We'll exhaust them this year, and as a result, this budget proposal takes into consideration a decrease of $1.8 million in terms of federal stimulus or jobs fund money. In terms of other local, other revenue sources, there's a slight decrease of $14,000. Overall, that results in an increase of $1.4 million in terms of revenue. Taking a look at expenditures, this is a similar theme that you have seen over the years. About 74% of our budget is directed towards direct instruction. We have needed expenses in terms of student attendance and health, which includes speech services and psychological services, pupil transportation. Kids can't learn if we don't get the kids there. That represents about $7.5 million of our budget, and the technology expenses, which the superintendent was discussing. Overall, in terms of administrative cost, under the state category, that's about 2.2% of our budget. So that gives you a highlight of our overall expenditures. In terms of the items that we fund through the budget, in terms of state object, as you all know, about 88%, over 85%, but creeping up, now 88% of our budget proposal is related to staff salaries and employee benefits. So any changes in those factors have a significant impact on our budget. And as you will see, and as you know, VRS is the major theme here, or the major story in terms of added expenses. Overall, in terms of a high-level overview of the budget, retirement, as I've said a couple times now, is the most significant increase that we have, about $4.2 million underneath the governor's proposed budget in terms of increased costs. Health insurance of about $350,000, and I will share that the superintendent has made some proposals for adjustments to the superintendent's proposed budget that the board will consider. We originally thought that health insurance would be even higher than this $350,000. We are fortunate the fact that the renewal has come in at a 0% increase, so we are recommending that the $350,000 be reallocated towards other sources, which we'll cover. We also have other increases in terms of sub-teachers, just looking at past history, legal, bus driver aides, and so on. We know that as the budget becomes tighter and tighter, we need to make sure that we make budget adjustments to reflect our actual expenditures, because I don't look good in orange, and neither does the superintendent. We need to live within our means, and we need to make sure that we budget appropriately as we go forward. And I can see, again, that lightning moment. In terms of expenditure overview, in terms of reductions, we have reduced various positions to 54 positions, including 16 support, 18 teacher assistants, and so on. And we have merged certain departments, central office departments, for a savings of about $3 million. Middle school athletics, this is adjustment that the superintendent made in terms of recommendation to the board, so that is not if the board takes that particular proposal, this would not be the case. We would continue to have middle school athletics, AP exam fees. Parents would again pay those fees. However, we would not require that the student take AP. It would be individual choice on behalf of the student. And then there are various base budget reductions, about $950,000. That's due to various retirement savings, budget adjustments in the base budget, which is a good thing because that resulted in less of a need for other reductions. You do have a green document in front, which was the school board agenda from last night. As I alluded to, the health insurance, there is a 0% increase, so under this recommendation, that money would go elsewhere. There is a reduction in pre-K that was discussed extensively at the board meeting in terms of 2 teachers and 2 teacher assistants, as well as a bus driver and bus aide. And then a reduction in terms of fuel for pre-K as well. Those are reductions. In terms of additions, we would again return to what the current staffing caps are, ratios and caps at the elementary level, which we view as a positive thing. We did originally propose that the media assistants be reduced from the high schools. The SOQ requires that we have those positions, so we need to make those adjustments. And there is an addition or a proposal to add back middle school athletics within the budget proposal. With that, I am happy to take any questions.
Yes, sir. I'd like to ask about the percentage of healthcare costs that the employees cover. And I think the answer was about 18%. Has that changed? Have we reevaluated how much of a percentage the employees should pay? It just strikes me that we have a zero increase, which is a good thing. It didn't go up. But is there an opportunity to drop that by changing deductibles for doctor visits or whatever?
There's certainly opportunity to, and we evaluate on a yearly basis in terms of the plan design. If you change the plan design and go to a higher deductible, or you change the structure and so on, typically those type of changes would be better suited if you made them when you were also providing a salary increase. If we make adjustments right now, our employees will take a step backwards in terms of total compensation. So we have, at this point, not made those recommendations. We think that the 0% increase, it doesn't, we're not required to budget additional funds in terms of W-JCC funds, and the employee will also be paying the similar amount or the same amount as the current year. But I think going forward, we will continue to evaluate that on a yearly basis. I think it's an important point that you raise. Yeah,
I appreciate that looking into it moving forward. And I understand that, if you add a cost to an employee, it's a step back. But in this economic reality, is that we're all having to step back and maybe help spread out some of that expense.
Scott, the health care covers the insurance for employees.
Yeah.
Do you work with the county on that to come up with better pricing?
As you're aware, there's a joint position that we that we share. That evaluation happens again on a yearly basis, looking for opportunities to where we can be more competitive in terms of the rates that we receive. So that analysis does happen. It may be that in the future, if the county wants to go down this road, that we might join forces in terms of self-insurance or whatever like. We've been very fortunate in terms of the rates that we've received under local choice, which is a statewide pool to state, and then other jurisdictions participate in that. We've been fortunate in terms of the rates that we've received, but anything is subject to change from year to year. And the fact that we have a joint position means that things are looked at as a group, if you will. So
has this been evaluated? Has this been put down on paper, evaluating the school's insurance, health care coverage compared to the county's health care coverage, and doing a comparative there, seeing if it's feasible to line the two up and having any cost savings. Have they done that yet with the shared position or no?
I believe that they have done that evaluation in terms of the shared position, but I will certainly ask when I get back.
I wonder if, building on the point about whether or not there might be an increase in employee contribution, if it might not be worth investigating what that looks like in terms of maybe being able to save a position from layoff or more than one position from layoff. Seems like that might be a valuable piece of information to have if there was a change overall, since we are talking about a fairly substantial number of employees. Would there be enough to perhaps reduce the amount of position layoffs that we have to do? I don't know, it just seems like that might be a little bit more attractive, even if it's a step backwards, if it's saving a position in today's economy. I think that would be a very interesting piece of information.
There are no raises proposed this year in the budget?
That's correct, sir.
And could you just amplify a little bit on the share of funding that's provided by the state? As I look at the documentation you provided, it looks like we're about $5.5 million below the 2009 level in terms of state support. I'm on page 24, I think, of the white budget summary.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
There's
So basically, the situation we're in at this point is one which local governments have provided additional support for schools. You're asking for some additional assistance in that regard. Our basic problem is that the state has significantly reduced its funding. That was cushioned to some extent by the federal stimulus money, but now that money has gone, and we are left with the state still significantly below where we were in 2009.
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Thanks. So I guess I would say this is a good opportunity for us with the fact that the legislature hasn't yet adopted a budget to express very clearly the sense that improving the level of support by the Commonwealth for our public education system should be a very high objective of the budget conferees.
If I may, another question. In the page 8 in this colored document, in case anybody doesn't recognize, the extra $1 million for teachers, sub-teachers, and sub-drivers, understanding that you're proposing that increase to match what's happening in reality. Are you seeing an increase of need in sub-teachers, and so what's happening, that more people calling out, or I mean, is there a trend here that we should be aware of?
There is a trend of
I don't know how you get people not to be sick. How do you get teachers and other staff not to get sick where they don't require a sub? But if we're trending up, is there an issue there?
I think in 2009, we spent our actual expenditures were about $1.6 million in terms of substitutes, and then 2011 it was 1.6, and our 2012 budget was about $1.1 million. We just have a significant issue in terms of making sure that these accounts are budgeted at the appropriate levels. Mm-hmm. I think that absenteeism is slightly at an increase in terms of perhaps the past, but that is also the function of growing. We have some of our teachers in terms of grant funds and so on have increased and so on, so we're going to have increased expenses in that area. So there is a trend that is ticking upward, and we're evaluating that in terms of trying to provide some additional detail to the building level so we can track, to see if there's a particular situation that we need to take care of. But I really think the real story is that we need to budget what our actual history tells us And as you become tighter and tighter, you don't have the balances to cover that. So.
I would also add, too, that yesterday, and this is a tangential comment, but it might be relevant. Yesterday, and I haven't read it yet, the MetLife survey of the American teacher came out. It's a yearly national survey that is done, and there is a growing trend nationally. Teacher satisfaction nationally is down 19%. The percentage of teachers who indicate that they're going to leave the profession is up 30%. And embedded in all of this data, I suspect that we are not immune, from the challenges that public education faced. I haven't read it. I just saw this morning, as a matter of fact, that it came out yesterday, and so I looked at the one-paragraph news blurb. So I've shared with you everything I know about what the survey says, but I would encourage you to read that, because I think it's pretty interesting information about nationally where we are with public education.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, because that kind of speaks to what I was wondering if it was the case. Are employees disheartened and unmotivated, and so they call out more readily, and then that causes the need for, subs.
I have no data right in front of me, but I know that stress levels are high. I mean, if you tuned into the board meeting last night, or you have a chance to look at the math proposal, I would encourage you to look at what third grade students are being asked. The two engineers on our board I think they got a run for their money on a couple of the questions. So there is a great deal of stress amongst teachers nationally. I don't think we're immune to that. And what role that plays, I don't know, but my sense is it must play some role.
I would think the same thing, and they're getting more and more asked of them with less and less. And I understand the economic realities that we're all facing, but in education, when you're looking at an ever-changing picture, and they're being asked to keep up, and they're being judged on how a student in their classroom is doing on a standardized test. And right now it's not a growth model, but we're looking to change to a growth model. But then you throw in this math SOL, that who knows if anybody can grow on that type of rigor. It's a very tough thing, and I think we're very concerned about morale right now. So
I think, and Ms. Larson's point is well taken. I shared with the board something, and I'll share with you this morning, just to give you one idea of what we're trying to work through. The Commonwealth has applied for a waiver to No Child Left Behind. You've heard all about all that stuff going on. If you want a waiver, you have to put in place a growth model, which the state has developed based on the SOLs only. The state superintendent, simultaneously to suggesting that we go to a growth model, has announced that she believes that scores across the state will go down. So there will be no growth. So I think we're right back in the same boat again. It's just a different name. And math is first, reading is changing, writing is changing, science is changing all at once within the same 12-month period, at a time when professional learning monies have dried up to almost nothing. So those are stress factors for us in terms of trying to provide a quality education and live within our means. And it's not whining, it's just reality, and that's what we're trying to figure out how to do.
And along those same lines, while the local funding for our schools has stayed constant, the state funding has reduced by $5 million. Our enrollment continues to increase, and so we're asking the teachers to teach more kids. They haven't had additional raises in several years now, and all that comes to head. Now, I don't want anyone going away from here thinking that our teachers are not engaged and our teachers are not out there working doing hard and doing the best that they can for our students. I firmly believe that, and know that they're out there doing all they can to push our kids
I think
to
that
further
was part of my struggle in answering the question. The vast majority of our staff are there, and I mean, Sure, there are situations to where there might be a trend that speaks otherwise, but that doesn't speak to our staff as a whole.
We had 2 meetings with any teachers who wanted to come to talk with us about the budget. And I think we had a little over 100 teachers in the meetings. And as I went into the meeting, from my car to the door, I was thinking, okay, how badly am I going to get beat up, in terms of some of the things that we're talking about. And the staff was really wonderful. I mean, these folks understand it, they get it, they're working hard. We're out in the schools every week, and people are, from my vantage point, as I visit classrooms, I see people working and doing the very best they can, and they're sharing with us the real realities of, Steve, how are we going to do this? And our answer is, we'll figure it out. We'll work on it together. We're going to do the very best we can with what we've got. But there are some daunting challenges, and we'll have to figure out a way to solve the problem.
I did want to follow up on a point that Mr. Kelly made about our enrollment going up, because we are very unique in the Commonwealth of Virginia. As we go to our meetings with our Virginia School Board colleagues, we have colleagues that are facing the opposite problem, and that they have school buildings that they cannot fill, they have a decreasing enrollment. And when the PTA Council recently hosted a school board night where there was dialogue between parents and school board members and the administration, we heard over and over, we moved here for your schools. We had an opportunity to go to Virginia Beach, to Newport News, to York. We wanted to come here for Williamsburg, James City County Schools. So it is imperative to us to make sure that we remain competitive and attractive so that people will want to come here to our communities. So I think the fact that we still have a growing enrollment is something that we really need to pay attention to as a community. So, yes.
I did want to comment that it's been a very good discussion about the staff, because what really struck me in this presentation was that 88% of your costs are people. And it brought me back to a very unpleasant time in my military career, post-Vietnam drawdown, when we were doing a little surgery with a meat axe on a military. And we were told repeatedly that the solution to the problem is we're going to do more with less. And we finally got to the point where we figured we were so qualified at doing more with less that we could eventually do it all with nothing. And morale became a huge problem. And I see the potential with 88% of our funding here in people programs being a really significant problem for us. My daughter teaches down in the Newport News system, and I can tell you, God love the teachers. They deserve combat pay. This is really a difficult job. I'm surprised more of them don't burn out. I think you have a real challenge that you've identified that you need to face. But we have to remember that the people are the solutions to our problem. They are not the problem. We don't solve our problem on their backs. We solve our problem with their cooperation.
Thank you.
I mean, it seems to me that this whole direction of this discussion, it's incumbent upon us to really think about sort of what are some of the kinds of metrics we can use to determine sort of what is happening out there, and be ready for what changes are coming. And I'm not sure I see in anything I've looked at those kinds of metrics. So, I mean, I'm not sure what they are. I can think of some off the cuff, but I wonder if it wouldn't be a good exercise to really think critically and innovatively about sort of what do we know and how can we put together some metrics that can help us forecast where these problems can emerge and what does that mean for our budget.
I think that's a great suggestion. I think some of that is happening now. I'm encouraged by the suggestions of metrics in the strategic planning conversations. I think we're getting to the point, there's no question in my opinion that we have to mature with the use of our data. How we have it, we look at it, and what are we going to do with it? And how's it going to affect change, and how's it going to inform instruction? And so I think you're right. And I sit here today saying that with the data systems that we're building, trying to put into place with the consortium, with the strategic plan, with the understanding that Baldrige is a metrics-driven model. I hope over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to begin to look at what metrics can we use not only to evaluate, but to try to predict where we're going to be.
Yes.
So last year, a fair amount of our conversation revolved around the proposal to eliminate ball and work with the coaching program. Could you give us, just although we're not quite a year through that, could you give us an update on how that's going?
Sure. We've had one presentation to the board. We have to wait. The hard data of how did these kids perform is going to come to us obviously at the end of our first year. Did it get better, did it stay the same, or did it get worse? But the most recent thing that we have done is that we have surveyed all of the parents and all of the kids who are being affected by the student coaching program. And we'll be sharing that information with the board in an upcoming report. We know that as an initial step, we've learned some things, we've made some adjustments, we've made some corrections. But today we're actually touching more students than we did before, and we see, and I hesitate because I don't have data in front of me yet to back this up, but my hypothesis is that we are going to see some, if nothing else, we're going to be able to maintain success with a larger number of students, if that makes sense. As I said from the very beginning, when I came in, kind of in the middle of that conversation, I think the best that we can do is make a very clean assessment of this process and then determine, is this the very best thing that we can do, or do we need to do something else? So we're collecting anecdotal information, parent responses, student responses, contact time, number of times there's interactions, what teachers are doing. All of that information is being collected as a backdrop to when we have, how did they perform on a test, what was their final grade. Then we can make some determinations about how that program is going. I will say as a precursor that the vast majority of parents that responded to us, and I don't remember the percentage and I don't want to guess, were aware of the program and pleased that their child was in it. And so that indicator, which is one I can remember off the top of my head, was at least a positive sign that we're moving in the right direction.
And once you've had the opportunity to collect all the appropriate data and share it with the school board, I'd suggest that it would be helpful if you'd be willing to come to at least to City Council and give us a report on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
One other question. I've heard statistics, and I know they can be used in a lot of different ways, but on a national level, that high school graduation completion rates are as low as 66 or 67%. You had in the video a student holding up a sign, half of us will not graduate from high school. And yet the number that you gave us was the 87 plus the 5 plus the 2 plus the 2. How does that compare? I mean,
well, I think one of the things, my message there is that this community should be very proud of an excellent graduation rate, even though it's measured in different ways in different states, and the math that's used is different from state to state. The calculation of graduation rates in Georgia is completely different than the calculation rates in Virginia. So sometimes I wonder how we get these national numbers when there are 50 different ways that graduation is being calculated in the country. The other thing I want to at least have you remember is that when you hear national statistics, much of it is being driven by urban centers. And in urban school districts and urban centers, in my opinion, they are facing significant issues with dropout rates. It is very likely that an urban center like Chicago or Los Angeles or New York is experiencing a 50% dropout rate or better. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I think we have understood the plight of urban education for a long time. But what happens in urban centers and what happens, this is Steve's opinion, and what happens in suburbia, and I would argue that Williamsburg is more suburbia than it is downtown Chicago, is very, very different. So somehow somebody who's probably a lot smarter than me takes all of that information and distills it down to some number. And I don't know the validity of that number either, Paul. I really don't. What I do know is that our graduation rates, our completion rates of high school, I have this opinion. I believe it is important to complete high school. And if it takes you a month or 3 months or 6 months beyond 4 years, I would rather have you complete than not complete. But the state wishes to measure what happens with a group of students that comes in on this day and leaves on this day. So if we're an urban school system, we have a transiency rate of 60%. We don't, but let's say a school in Chicago does. Immediately, regardless of the number of people who graduate 4 years later, 60% of them are not the kids who started 4 years ago. So that calculation is going to be different. So it's a very intertwined issue with completion rates. And so my purpose this morning was to make sure that our partners understand that the 87 that you see on the state website is not indicative of the numbers of students who drop out of our school system. That really was my whole point this morning. We have 9 students who we've confirmed have dropped out. It's 9 too many. But it's not the 65 and 70 number that people tell me we have. That simply is not accurate. But I get what happens when you look at the data. So I don't know if I answered your question well. It's a little convoluted, but we have to remember that a lot of the national data is being driven by the largest school systems in the country. The largest school systems in the country are urban school systems, and they are facing significant issues with student achievement, retention, and dropout.
Can I just ask a couple of questions about the impact of this year's budget? First is, one of the indicators of the recent success of the school system was in the increase in AP test taking. What kind of impact do you anticipate the elimination of funding of AP fees will have on participation?
I would expect that the numbers of children who choose to take the test, not necessarily the number of children who choose to take the class, but I would anticipate that we could see a drop in the number of kids who choose to take the test if they have to pay for it themselves.
And that will affect the weighting of the course, is that right?
I'm sorry?
Will that affect the weighting of the course in terms of their GPAs?
No.
Something of that nature?
No.
Scott
has one thing to add.
Can I just interject that, if there's a situation of need, there are state funds or whatever, we're going to take care of that particular situation. A student that doesn't have the resources to take AP exams, we need to take care of that situation, and we will. So,
yeah. I think
I just want to make sure that was clear.
Socioeconomically disadvantaged students and free and reduced lunch, we have obligations to those students which we'll meet. But when we pay for an exam, we can force you to take it. When we don't pay for the exam, we can't force you to take it. So I suspect we'll see a drop in those numbers. That would be my hypothesis. If they don't, that'd be great.
And of course, the advantage to having them take the test is partly that you do have the opportunity then to evaluate the performance of those classes, of students overall in those classes compared to a national.
Going back to
sample,
metrics,
right?
we've always known the difference between a student score in a test and the grade that the teacher has given them in the class. So there is a disadvantage.
Second, I had the opportunity to watch a good bit of your meeting last night, and was very impressed, of course, with the preschool program's accomplishments and achievements. And I guess I'm wondering whether you anticipate any increased costs at the elementary level as we scale back the program for preschool. I don't imagine it would happen immediately, but over the next couple of years, will there be a need for more intervention services being provided at kindergarten, first grade level?
That's a great question, and we're looking at about a reduction of 30 students, I think was the number last night. And so it is possible, the preschool has always been a pay me now or pay me later kind of venture, and we've had some long, arduous meetings about this particular issue, and I don't I didn't make the secondary recommendation very lightly. I made sure that we talked a great deal with our staff. I would like to believe that for those particular 30 kids who move through our system, that we're going to find a way to absorb them into the present remediation processes that we have and try not to see any kind of a significant, and that was my question, is this going to turn the nose downward in 3 years? And we don't believe that with that particular number that it's small enough that we hopefully can take care of it. We'll know that, in 2 or 3 years, but
Right.
it's purely conjecture at this point.
But what I also heard last night was there's a waiting list of 80 students
Yes,
for
sir.
that program, which means that they're, rather than having the potential of reducing the need for intervention later on, we are going to continue to have that need going forward
Oh,
for
absolutely.
those students as well.
Absolutely. And as the rigor of education rises, that need for intervention will also rise as well. And so that just goes along with it.
And then on the question of the new math, Mr. Hendricks, yeah, I thought that that was a very interesting presentation, a little bit sobering. And I guess my question would be, what is it that we're anticipating seeing here? Is it that we will this year see a big drop, which will then mean as people become acclimated to the new expectations, we'll see an increase happening over the next several years? Or is your suggestion that there may be a problem in terms of getting teachers prepared for the expectations of this new program?
That's a great question. We started preparing teachers over a year ago, and we're beginning to do the best we could to ring the bell and say, hey, the standards are changing. And so we have tried to bring our staff along with this fairly significant and fairly rapid change to the rigor of standards in mathematics. I believe that we're going to see a classic implementation dip. I think we'll see a dip, and then we'll see us come out of the dip as teachers are truly aware of what the test entails and how instruction needs to be tailored to that test. So the first time out of the gate, which is happening this year, I expect there'll be a dip or a drop. I think it's going to be more than a dip. And then I think we'll see ourselves. The only thing I have to go by is my experience in Georgia with the Georgia CRCT, which is the equivalent of the Virginia SOL. When the new math program came out and was tested, the state dropped to a 31% pass rate across the state, and that dropped from about 80. So things can happen significantly, but I think as our teachers understand it and as we are able to deliver professional learning and support, it'll come back out of it.
There's an emotional cost to it.
Thank you.
Am I correct? I know there's been significant discussion with the school board regarding the pre-K program, and the pre-K program is 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. Is that correct?
Primarily 3- and 4-year-olds, 2-year-olds, special education students.
And these are these families that seek this out? Are they sought out? Been brought into this program?
There's a number of different ways that screenings happen. There's referrals from CDR, there's referrals from social services, there are parents who do seek it out. There's a number of ways students are brought to the attention of the continuum of services.
And I was watching your meeting last night, and I didn't get a sense that correct me if I'm wrong, this program's been around for 20 to 29 years. Am I correct with that?
40.
And 40, excuse me. Thank you for the correction. But from what I was watching, I heard about how wonderful it was, but I didn't hear any data as to really tracking the success of the program, other than how wonderful the program was. And when we were talking about $3 million for 350 students, and I appreciate there's been an adjustment made in that. You've taken a look at this program. I was quite surprised at that.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that's where, when we go talking about concerns with education, I agree with Mayor Hallman is, you know, I understand that there's a lot of competition that the teachers have with all the technology that our students have in front of them on a daily basis, you know, that be it the iPhone, the iPad, the whatever it is. But I do think it's important that we also stick to pencils and paper as well, and good basic curriculum, so that the students have time to kind of step back and think. And I apologize, I kind of went off track on that.
That's
but
okay.
That regarding the pre-K program, you know, my concern is that this hasn't been measured. The students haven't been not that I want to be tracking students, but you want to track the success.
I think that we talked a little bit about, again, how we need to improve some of the data systems that we have, but we actually did share some significant data with the board last night. The kindergarten phonemic awareness and literacy, which we refer to as PALS, 132 former Bright Beginning general education students require no literacy interventions as a result of their test taking on the PALS. 76 of 84 former Bright Beginning special education students successfully met the PALS benchmark, required no literacy interventions. And 38 of 38 former Bright Beginnings English language learners, those are students for whom English is not the main language in their home, successfully met the PALS benchmark and required no literacy interventions. 94% of preschool special education students demonstrated positive social emotional skills. 96% of special education students demonstrated age-appropriate communication and literacy. These are Virginia Department of Education special education performance indicators. And 96% of preschool special education students demonstrated appropriate behaviors to meet their needs. So while I recognize that we can do better at collecting more data, we did share data that the preschool program has a significant impact on kindergarten readiness.
If I could, Dr. Constantino, I mean, I found that evidence to be incredibly powerful, and I would encourage you to send that material out to the City Council and Board of Supervisors so that we can have the opportunity to see the effect of that. My understanding is that there was a correction in terms of understanding how much money is actually being spent on instruction, that we're talking about $2.2 million, not more than $3 million in that program for the instruction itself.
The total program, including transportation, was about
It's $3.5 million overall for the program, and most of that expense is instruction.
Mm-hmm. But that's also strong evidence for pay me now or pay me later, and it might be interesting to look at what are the intervention costs later on that are being avoided because of those success rates that you just talked about. Right. And my guess is those are pretty significant numbers when you start putting them together.
That's okay. Ms. Cordero.
Well, again, I think it's very important to distinguish the fact that we were talking about special ed versus other situations. Special ed, we have no choice about, that is mandated. But I think one of the things that we're ignoring is because we do not have the data to know what happens to them in 3rd and 4th and 6th grade, most of the research that I have done in states which they have implemented preschool, universal preschool, especially concentrating on at-risk, they have lost any ground that they have gained by 4th grade. And so I think we have to really be careful that we're making sweeping assumptions because we don't have the data to back it up. And again, we're talking about less than 10% reduction in this program. And when we look at the overall scope of the budget and the amount of money that we're having to cut in areas, it seems like that is a valid representation, at least to start. And if we have the funds in the future to restore it, we can certainly look at that. As I said last night, it may very well be a value that we adopt in our community that we're willing to do this. But we have to understand what the cost is, and we really do need to measure long-term whether or not we are getting what we think we're getting from that. And notwithstanding the excellence of the programs or the values that have been demonstrated in kindergarten, but I need to see long-term what's happening. And as I said last night, you know, looking at the risk criteria, my husband would have met 4 of them. And he didn't do any of those things and was able to be successful. Now, that may be the exception of not the rule, but I think, again, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about an enormous budget. We're talking about 350 students as opposed to the 10,000 students that are in our K-12 system, and we have to have our focus on that.
Well, and I appreciate your comments, and I think philosophically, whether this is a popular stance or not, I see pre-K as part of our core business. And I understand that others don't, but I do. And I'll continue to make the recommendation to the board that we try to preserve these programs, understanding, of course, that we will improve our data collection and management over time. But I appreciate those. I appreciate that the data issues.
Madam Chair, may I?
Ms. Knutson and then you, Mr. Kennedy.
I just wanted to follow up on, as if any of you've read the Gazette this morning, you know how I feel about preschool education. I think it's very important. In fact, I have once or twice facetiously recommended dropping 12th grade and adding to preschool, because I think that's what's important, is preschool. But I think that the mayor is exactly right. I think the intervention later on is going to wind up costing us more. One of the things when I was on the preschool task force, which was an effort to expand preschool programs in the community, because we knew there were these 80 or some children. And every year the preschool task force met, we would say to ourselves, there are 80 children we just lost again. 80 children we didn't get enrolled in these programs. And it went on. And by the time preschool task force ended, the kids we would have enrolled were in about 3rd grade, and it was too late. And that you feel like you're losing some huge portion of the community. I would also be very careful of national data on these programs. Unfortunately, when we looked at the different programs in the community, some were significantly better than others in a lot of ways. And in fact, the School Bright Beginnings was significantly better than other preschool programs in the community in terms of outcomes that were measured. So I think you have to watch out for these programs don't work because the kids are all the same in the 4th grade. You got to look at the different programs. So I feel very strongly that this, as the superintendent said, this is part of what we should do in our education system.
And I think there's a lot of, if I may, research, there's a lot of people who talk about research, and I'm not a researcher. I have not done any research in pre-K. I have only read other people's research in pre-K. I'm a weekend researcher at best, and the first thing that I do is I go look at who they're citing. And I look very carefully at the citations of research, and sometimes that tells you a great deal about what that particular research article will say. So as I read, as I try to educate myself on what I believe is important, I don't want to give anybody the impression that I am a pre-K researcher. I'm not. There's a lot of smart people out there, and we just try to read what they write.
Mr. Kennedy.
A couple of questions. I've watched your meeting, not this past meeting, but the one previously, and I just want some understanding with pre-K. As a parent of a young child who's gone through 2 years of pre-K, I'm certainly a believer in it and the effectiveness. But I believe I heard you say that most of this $3.5 million is in instruction, and it's a half-day program. Is that correct?
It's a 4-hour program.
4-hour program. So the teachers are full-time teachers for this program, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, just a silly question, but why can't we do 2 programs, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, service more children? I mean, is that a possibility? Has that been explored? Several years back, I requested the same data that's being requested by Ms. Cordasco. That was back in 2000, 2001. We're going to look at it. We're going to track some things. We didn't do that. That hasn't happened. I mean, that was several superintendents ago. So, I mean, things have changed. Things have gone along. There's no take on you or anything else. It's just things, priorities change. But blended programs, there was talk at that time, Head Start, some blending there, some possibilities. Are we looking again at the redundancy of programs? What can be shared? What can be utilized? Can we service more children in the mainstream? If we have teachers who are there full-time, it's a 4-hour day. I mean, is there a reason why they can't do 2 split courses? Just, some questions, just asking for that as far as preschool goes, if we have a waiting list of 80 students and things such as that? And would it benefit us when we look at the transportation costs, which from what I understand during your meeting as well are pretty significant, if we're looking at specific neighborhoods where we have the greatest needs of preschool, to have a facility there that would be beneficial to not just pre-K, but evening courses, adult courses, things along those lines? Is that something that we should look at long-term as a goal? Just some questions to throw out there for you for long-term.
Well, and it's you know, it's funny you should mention about evening courses and adults and community, and, because I've had some of those thoughts and want to share some of those things as we get into the next part of our conversation. I asked the same question about the half-day program and learned, and I would encourage you, if you didn't see last night's presentation, to watch that as well, because Mrs. Dino is the expert in this program, and I know what I've learned from her in terms of what happens in the community. But we screen, I think we screened 950 students last year. So the teachers, when they're finished teaching, they start screening and evaluating, which is a fairly continuous process. That there are constant referrals, the connection, the continuum of services that we have in this community between CDR and our school district were highlighted for the board last night. I think your questions are good questions, and I think specifically the neighborhood question, the transportation, those are things we might be able to look at, and we may have looked at them in the scope of the last couple of conversations. But I think that go ahead, just tell them.
Teacher planning. If you double up on the faculty's load, if you have 4 hours and then 4 hours. There's no provision for any kind of teacher planning, which all of our faculty receive from elementary to high school. So that's one of the challenges in terms of just doubling up the program, among others.
Pre-K programs, those teachers are also doing home visits throughout the year, multiple visits to each home to understand the environment the child's living in and how best to help parents participate in the process to continue the education outside of the school and back in the home. And I think that's an extremely valuable piece to that, to any kind of pre-K effort, and that would be eliminated if you had to.
Sure, but the need to lift every rock and figure things out is a valid point, and I think that we're doing that. We're going to have to continue to do that. You know, you never know where the next idea is going to come from about, hey, have we looked at this? I know that we have longitudinal data issues, and I know that we have to keep looking at our program. But I also know that this program, from what I understand, not having been here since its inception, is something that the community is very proud of and has spent a great deal of time building. And my goal is to try to preserve it the best we can through this process. So I take very seriously the comments about data, the comments about the future, the comments about transportation. Those are all things that we're just going to have to continue to explore to try to determine, is this the most efficient way we can operate?
Is this a standard program, or the standard program with the other school districts in the localities? My apologies, Mr. Prater.
I
James,
think,
I think, you know, Williamsburg, James City County, we all have tremendous pride in our schools. My son went through the entire school system here, so I'm very familiar with it. And I'm just curious as to, is the pre-K program something that other our neighbors offer as well?
yes, I think that our program is by far superior.
Or is it? Does your county have it? Is it
Yes.
in Hampton, Newport News,
Yes.
and so forth? Okay, thank
The
you.
VPI, I don't know if we want to get it. Yeah.
That's
You
what-
have to have it. You have to have the program for special education.
I'm talking about pre-K. I'm talking about pre-K. So I'm separating the issue pre-K versus just pre-K special
I
education.
think they
I'm
only
not- so
serve
the-
4-yearolds, though. I think Hampton and Newport News only serve.
I'm not an expert
Do
on
4-year-olds, but not the 2- and 3-year-olds.
Correct.
Okay.
Unless they have special education
All right,
plans.
That's okay, 2-year-olds, it's state mandated. that-
We only do 2 years.
Yeah, who have special ed, who have an IEP, if you're 2. but that's state mandated. Dr. Prater.
I just want to make a brief statement. The proposal made by the superintendent last evening, I thought was an excellent one. He recognized the fact that the pre-K program is an excellent program, while at the same time, he tried to maintain the integrity of the existing regular program. And I have not heard anybody, except me, and I got attacked for this, but said that cutting out teachers is impacting the regular programs we offer. So we need to make sure we do what we can to reserve that particular element of our program. So when he made the adjustment saying that we're going to try to maintain our elementary school teachers at the level they are, while at the same time offer the pre-K program and balance the two, I think the weight of the cut needs to be on both programs. And I think that's what he's done. I thought it was an excellent thing.
Could I follow up? Yeah. Let me follow up on Oscar's. You know, I think what we're dealing with here are harsh economic realities balanced against who we are and what we are as a community. And I think we're trying to walk a line that takes account of the realities of what we're dealing with, but also saying, you know, we are a unique and special community. We do things that other people don't do, and we do them for good reasons, and they have good results. And I think that's the kind of debate we're having right now, and I'm not uncomfortable with where we're going with this.
Mr. Foster, I apologize.
That's all right.
Sorry.
This may have been what Dr. Prater was alluding to, but talking about 18 teacher assistants and 20 teaching positions. Can you go through the practical implication of that? Having a mother that's a teacher, you know, a part-time, or a part of the day teaching assistant in a room full of 20 kindergartners can make all the difference in the world. Are we weighting that in any particular way? Elementary, middle, high? What do we expect the actual outcome to be from, you know, this 38 positions?
Well, I think with the first thing I'll say is that with the change, the recommended change last night, it drops a few from 20, right?
Right now, we budget 33 teaching positions, about 32 teacher assistants. So I'm just trying to.
Well, the 20,
yeah.
The 20 was before we made the recommendation last night, correct? Yes. So that, I think that's dropped to 13.
Pre-K.
I don't really care about the number.
Okay. All right. When we met with the principals, we talked about different scenarios in terms of what is manageable, understanding that we have a lot. We're very blessed in this school division to have a great deal of support, and I think that that's something that I don't want our teachers, I don't want our community to take for granted. I don't want you to think we take for granted. So the teaching assistants, primarily elementary school. I met with the elementary school principals and said, help me formulate a plan that saves us money that you can work with. And the principals, along with the finance department, we met for a long time talking about the role of teaching assistants and what, if we took a minimal reduction in each one of our buildings, was that a workable plan? And the answer I got back from the principals was yes. That, and the deal that we've struck, basically, is that when we remove the 2 assistants per building, we're going to give the principals the flexibility to use those assistants as they see fit. So we might be seeing them used differently in different schools based on needs. I think every principal, and I'm not going to speak for them, but I don't think that any principal is interested in removing a kindergarten teaching assistant. I think those teaching assistants will stay in their classrooms. After kindergarten, we have a teaching assistant for every grade level, I think is the way it works. So what we're saying is if we take 2, can you reorganize and redistribute the workload? So that would be the impact.
You end up teachers sharing this.
Well, they share now,
per assistant.
and they're going to have to come up with new paradigms, which the principals were confident they could do. So in a lot of our budget discussions, we tried to talk with people and say, if we were to do this, what does that mean? And in some cases, they told us, you can't do that, and we didn't. But in this particular case with teaching assistants, they said, none of this is what we want, but it's workable, that we could make it work.
And I just want to point out, and I've said it before, in our division, while teachers' assistants often get thought of, and I'm sure they do cut their share of construction paper and that type of thing, they are used instructionally. They are out in the hallways in small reading and math groups. And in a kindergarten, if you walk into a kindergarten classroom, that teacher's assistant is taking half the class a lot of the time. So this, we realize the economic realities, and we're looking at that, obviously, but make no mistake that will have an impact. I think that our staff will certainly step up and do what they're asked to do, but there is an impact to that.
And I appreciate you pointing that out, because that's primarily the reason I asked that question. That's a position that's often misunderstood.
It is misunderstood. Another example of that is reading, of course, is a focus for us. One of the things that I've asked to pilot and that we've been piloting this year is called the DRA-2, which is the Developmental Reading Assessment. 2 just happens to be the second generation. It's a way to determine reading levels of students, but it is done with individual students and takes 35 minutes per student. And many of our teaching assistants are doing that assessment so that we can get a better handle on reading and improve our reading in our school division. So I know that there is some mentality out there about teaching assistants, and trust me, in the last couple of weeks or month or so when I visit schools, everyone is very eager to point out what the teaching assistants are doing. So I understand that, and I think our community I hope our community understands that as well.
Mr. Farrell?
Dr. Constantino, could you provide the PAL scores that you were giving us earlier? What grade level were those?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
Are we going to move on to the CIP?
Sure. With your permission, I'm going to stay right in my seat. It's probably harder for you to throw things at me if I sit. Yeah, you might want to move away from me. Yeah, see you. Greg, if we can continue with it's not up there. Yeah, let's go to the statement. I'd ask you to read the screen just for a second. The most important line for me as superintendent is the last line. The system fits the individual rather than the individual having to fit the system. I recognize that I inherited a situation with middle school capacity and have been spending a great deal of time trying to figure out a short-term and a long-term plan for our school division and maintain our focus on hopefully being a premier school division in the future and resolving real issues in terms of space and then real issues in terms of the education of children. So if you'll bear with me just a few minutes, my only purpose this morning is to give you a window into my thinking. I don't expect everybody to agree with my thinking, but I think it is my obligation to share with you what is going through my head in terms of the future of our school division, because I learned very early in life that somebody told me that where there is no vision, the people perish. And so I think one of the most important things that I have to do as superintendent is at least start to try to craft a vision for the future. And if we get there, great. If we don't, then we don't. The best possible quality of children's services is a system which recognizes individual needs and circumstances of all children. The most effective learning is learning which builds a detailed picture of which each child already knows and how they learn. Lastly, in order to help them go further and begin to train for work, we need to consider a system that recognizes individual aptitudes and provides as many tailored paths to college and employment as there are people and jobs. The best possible quality of children's services is a system, well, no, let me go back. Let's take a look. Go ahead, Greg, and cut a little bit of time off of this. This is a classroom from the turn of the 20th century. That's actually a museum now. At the time, we were preparing children for an industrial society. The next slide is a classroom from about today, which is a typical classroom of late. I would argue that there's no fundamental difference between those two, which means that we've been using basically the same physical space for the delivery of our lessons for at least the last 100 years. However, we're trying to prepare students for an experienced and technologically oriented economy, and the only thing that has not changed is the basic structure of education. Traditionally, the school building is an industrial package of boxes, usually referred to as a double-loaded corridor. What I am proposing is that we unpack the box and blur the lines between defined and flexible spaces in which students learn. I'd like to see us, at the very least, explore, conceptualize, and discuss a school that fits the needs of students through programmatic and design elements. Research shows that students learn in different ways and at different rates. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of teaching is to have at our disposal the multimodal methodologies to differentiate learning and the space by which to configure that learning. I want to make sure you understand that this is not a drawing of a proposed school. Let me say that again. This is not a drawing of a proposed school. This drawing is a conceptualization of how classrooms and schools are being redesigned for the future. Many districts, including some on the peninsula, have embraced the concept of flexibility of integrated design environments in which we are trying to teach our students. We need to make it easier for teachers to switch methodology and recombine students for short periods of time based on their mastery of stated standards. Not every student mastered standards on the same day and in the same way. As we look to the future, we understand three very important concepts. First, that the age of technology and instant information has changed the way people learn and access information. Skills in the workplace are more about the ability to leverage and use the available information or expertise and less about experience. Second, there is a national growing trend in charter school development, and that trend is currently being debated in the Virginia General Assembly. And third, the concept of virtual learning and blended learning, meaning a combination of teachers teaching and digital learning, is already a reality. I am asking that we simply have a conversation about a fourth middle school that can not only include the very real need to address the capacity issues of the future, but to address the three concepts stated above. We have the opportunity to look at a school that contains programs to meet the varying needs of students in spaces that are designed to master standards in the various ways students need to master them. For example, using formative assessment to immediately and temporarily redistribute students so that teachers can teach and reinforce based on student need would be a welcome situation for our teachers and might begin to solve some of the stress and morale problems that we suspect we will have. We could look at the possibilities of engaging students with engineering and science through STEM, or be ahead of the curve with STEAM, meaning science and technology, interpreted through engineering and the arts, all based in mathematical elements. The governor himself has supported and encouraged this kind of thinking in our schools, as have our representatives at the state and federal levels. There may even be funding grants available to us to implement these types of programs. Another option, we could look at designing a school that truly met the needs of expanding our International Baccalaureate program into the middle years if the interest was sufficient. Juxtaposed with that, we could ensure our commitment to personalized learning so that the school might be an attractive option for non-traditional learners as well. The fundamental premise of a charter school is to design a charter around a unique aspect of education that is not available in a public venue. The design of our new middle school, from a programmatic aspect, could also attract students from around our county and maybe even the region. Creating a choice school could be a potential answer for us as our society looks for options in education. Virtual learning will redefine what students experience not only in middle school but in high school as well. This new concept school could also meet the needs of high school students by offering virtual classes and other types of programs in the evenings for those high school students who wish to excel or for those need options in fulfilling requirements. One such idea is creating a digital academy that not only meets the needs of middle school students during the day, but meets the expanded need of high school students in the evening. All of this could slow down the need for additional high school space. Lastly, I would hope that we could envision a true community school, open to options for all community members for learning extension and community use. We can imagine everything from English language classes to supporting senior citizens with the placement of courses and classes such as the Christopher Wren Society and beyond. These ideas that I share are not meant to place parameters around what this school could be to the city of Williamsburg and our greater James City County community. This is only a start to allow us to begin to consider a possibility. We don't have all the answers to all of the questions. We do have enough to at least start a journey. I also know that within 5 or 10 years, the natures of schools and learning will be different. Young people's digital lifestyles challenge the relevance of current educational delivery. With no change in scope and design, our ability to engage our students will become more of a challenge than it is right now. For all these reasons, I only propose today a new type of thinking and conversation. Thinking and conversation that has as its core the needs of students. And adopting this proposal, I believe, would put their needs first. I share that with you this morning because I understand that my proposal has mixed reviews and brings a great deal of anxiety for a number of different reasons. Part of my job as superintendent is to point in a direction and at least talk about the future. I completely respect the school board and their ultimate decision, completely respect the funding partners and their ultimate decisions, but I don't think I would be doing my job if I didn't put a vision out there of what could be in a community that has very clearly told me since the day that I came here that they request a premier school system. If in the final analysis a different plan is adopted, then that's what happens. But I think part of my job today is to put out the possibilities and try to have a good conversation about what could be and what might be 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road. So that's the thinking inside my squirrely little head about the issue of short-term issues with our schools and then a long-term vision for education in our school division.
Thank you. We should point out, too, that the school board did not get to the CIP part of our budget discussion last evening due to time and having to meet with all of you today. So we have not had that discussion yet. We will continue it next week. So, question? Yeah, oh, yes, we certainly do. Yes. No, we want, yes, that will help us as we continue next week. So are there questions? Mr. Glennon.
I don't have a question. I just want to thank Dr. Constantino for raising this today because I think it is very much worth doing. We all know that we are going to make significant investments in our education system. And I think the frustration that some people have felt over the years is that we spend a lot of money and we would like to think that we have an even better school system than the very good one that we have. We seem to be stuck sort of in the same gear all the time. And I think challenging all of us to think about how we could do things differently and achieve better success, recognizing that I think Mayor Hallman has emphasized over the years the need to tie this to measurable indicators of whether we're succeeding in that objective is a very good thing to do. So I'd look forward to the conversation. I think everybody can be skeptical about certain aspects of it, and that's the way it ought to be. Because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're not just looking at something that will satisfy the fads of the moment, but rather something that really will allow us to prepare our students the world that they're going to face. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
I think we do need to continue this kind of thinking because something you said earlier struck me. Both my children are doing jobs that weren't even defined when they were in school. So there was no way to prepare them for the jobs they're doing except to teach them to think and to evaluate and to do all those kinds of things. And I think you're right. The school that has all those desks lined up looking at the teacher is not teaching those children to do that. And so I like the idea of flexibility and change and doing things differently.
This is one of the first times I think I've seen I won't call it a concept because it's before that. But you know, it's not a safe choice, and I think that's important. And it's also, you know, this is a community investment in a building, and it's nice that we're looking at not using it just from 8 to 3, that we're looking at a building that can serve, you know, high school adults and move on into and be using that building 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day versus just, you know, the way we use our middle schools for the short period that we do. So I'm looking forward to the discussion and as we put meat on the skeleton there to further define where we're going with this. I think it's an important thing to do.
Dr. Prater, I'm sorry. Mr. Fuentes?
And my comments aren't, the issue I think we're all talking about is the CIP item for 2017 for a new middle school. And my comments are here to be pro-build or pro-against. A little short history lesson, though, so that we understand it, because there's a lot of misunderstandings that I've heard over the past year. I think it was in 2008 when this whole board got together, and in the conversation, there was a conversation by Mr. Goodson, had we considered, when we bought online the new middle school, closing Blair and doing renovations to Blair for a few years and the money that would be saved on the overhead. The board took that back, and in fact I sent a message to the then superintendent saying that I thought that was something that needed to be considered. And in fact, affectionately, the board referred to that as the Goodson plan. So for about a year, well, I did. I affectionately called it the Goodson plan, but everyone knew what I was talking about, and I agreed with them. So the following year, that was presented to the board as an option for saving overhead, and I believe the savings per year is about $1 million, Dr. Burke-Buckler?
It's about two.
$2 million. So we had weighed all the pros and cons, and the only thing, and the board, I recall that night when we voted on it, there was some disagreement with some of us on the school board and the administration of how long Blair would be closed. Some of us felt it would be about 4 or 5 years, and some in the administration thought it would be 10 or 12 years. But regardless, all of us on the school board said don't get too comfortable in Blair because we're going to have to reopen that in the near future. But the important thing was that we were saving $2 million a year, and we knew there were going to be some costs to renovate Blair. So with that going forward, that was in 2008, and we're saying 2009. 2017 is what's showing up on the CIP as the projected date for the new need for the middle school. If it in 2000, and may not be 2017, maybe it's 2018, you know, depending on how the growth is. But we definitely have to do something by 2018. So I wanted to make sure everyone understood the baseline of how we got to where we got, at least from my historical perspective, that because the way things read in the paper, it makes it look like the school board was not aware that we were going to need a new school in 2015 or 16. We were very much aware of it, and we very much told the administration several times, and in fact I still have the articles that say don't get comfortable in there. So I just wanted to point that out as a starting point. So.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and again, we have not had a chance to discuss it, but one thing that struck me when you first started talking about something on the Blair site now is that I like where we are centralized at Blair. We're right kind of in the middle of things, and I think that our school employees, I think, like it as well. I get a lot of feedback that they're able to connect with central office a lot better being in that location. But the one thing, no matter what happens and how we proceed, I'm pleased that you are creatively thinking, because there tends to be this tendency, because money is so tight, that we stifle creativity because we are very worried about the bottom line. And I think you have to continue to worry about that bottom line, but I also think that education is creativity. And if you keep stifling what the future may bring, we're going to have a lot more issues. And so I appreciate that you're continuing to look to the future and how we can best serve our students, because our students, they are creatively, they're thinking creatively. All this, I don't know why I'm having such trouble with this word this morning, I'm sorry, but they are continuing to think that way all the time, and they are performing. You know, my kids are doing things on their computer for their class that I have no idea how to do. Things are going on flash drives, and things are being burned, and PowerPoints are being done, and that's the way that they're thinking this way. And so I'm glad to see us do that, and we may come here, and it may look different, but at least we're having a discussion about it, and I appreciate that. So
I appreciate that too, and I truly respect the ultimate decision-making power of the boards, and again, I can only reiterate to you that when I inherited this conundrum, I tried to, we were talking about, you know, we have a space problem, Well, after a year as superintendent, we have methodological issues and pedagogical issues and technology issues and things we want to get ready for the future. And this need for space in 2017, in my opinion, provides us an opportunity to have a conversation about the future. And it may, like you said, it could look completely different, could look, you know, maybe it won't get there, but I think that I would expect that you would expect of me to say, here's what I think is in the best interest 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. Even though none of us have a crystal ball, we're starting to see what the future may look like. So I appreciate the conversation and the input.
Mr. Prater? Ms. Jones?
Yes, thank
Mayor
you.
Holman?
And I want to thank you. You know, putting out an idea is wonderful, and the creativity. My concern is this creativity has a price tag of about $35 million that goes along with it. And going along with what Mr. Fuentes said, based on my recollection from board discussions and with the school board, the intent was to, as Mr. Fuentes said, we're going to need a middle school, bring Blair back online, put the students back in the school, and find an appropriate location for the administration, and be it looking at, you know, possibly as opposed to building new, reutilizing what we already have in the community that may be vacant, and using that space for administration. But the intent was always to bring that middle school back online for the students as well. And so I guess that's on that particular issue. That's where I am on that. Thank you.
This blue document, and it's too much to read now, but this is a document that I shared with the board in January, where I outlined I visited the supervisors last fall, I think, and what I promised the supervisors was that we were going to start again and look at all of the data that was available to us, and we did that. We contacted a realtor about available space. We looked at the options of spot redistricting. We looked at trailers. We looked at additions. We've had community input of late. All of that is spelled out in this document, and I would to add to the conversation as we move forward, to review all of the options that were open to us, and I hope that it leads you to why I've made this recommendation, which is a fundamental change from the plan that was in place before I got here. I completely recognize that. But if we're looking at space and we're looking at money, in my opinion, kids and creative classrooms outweigh the need for a different central office. And I wondered, and again, this is the newest guy on the block, if the reopening of Blair was about reopening Blair, or the reopening of Blair was about making sure we still had a school in that location. That's another conversation that we can have as well.
What is how many administrative employees are there? If you could refresh my memory.
There are about 125 people. That includes social workers, psychologists, and the like. Technology.
Yeah, I'm going to change direction here just a little bit, but in one of the overheads that you didn't do, you talked about future projections for the next 5-year budget, both operational and CPI. And in there you have revenues projected to increase by 4%. We're 4 years into a severe financial crisis. History tells us these things take a decade to work out. I wish the city's revenues would grow 4% but I'm working on the idea that we're in the 1 to 3% range and probably at the lower end of that range. So I wonder if this is really a very realistic assumption, given that your funding agencies aren't going to anticipate that kind of growth, and we are already stretching to pay for the education part of our budget along with everything else we do. And if you go back and redo that at 1.5% or 2%, what does that say, and what does that do for your planning as you move forward? Because realistically, Jack, you may be more optimistic than me, but I don't think so. And I just don't think we're going to see much more than 1.5% or 2% growth for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So I would suggest you go back and think about those numbers.
One of the reasons that projection is in the budget is to encourage the conversation that, where are we headed, where do the localities see, because when you reduce that to 1 or 1.5%, 2%, we all recognize that there'll be a bigger budget gap we can anticipate as costs go up, as at some point our employees are going to require an increase to remain even with inflation and so on. So
earlier
yeah.
On this same issue is looking at your budgets, taking those into not just the assumption of there's going to be an increase next year, because that's what we'd like to see, is what if, and also as Supervisor Kennedy and Councilman Pons raised the concerns as far as the costs regarding the health care. Where is VRS going? We're still waiting to see what comes out of Richmond.
Right.
Just for this upcoming budget. So we have so many variables out there, and a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's extremely important to keep in mind. And I just do want to comment, and Supervisor Eisenhower brought this up about the teachers and valuing the teachers and the people, and I think that it's very important the teachers understand, everyone sitting around this table values the teachers and values what they do and what they contribute to the community. We're also have to assess how best to approach these budgetary challenges that we're facing. And it's not that they're not valued. It's taking a look at, I think, quite frankly, it's been handled, that aspect has been handled quite well to this point. But it isn't about whether or not they are valued. It is what we can afford, and where is the money, is the funding going into the technology, is it going into the teachers and so forth, but, so I just wanted to, that's what I agree with Councilman, or Mayor Hallman on that.
And I think those conversations are going to occur. Do they occur now or do they occur later? And it's back to, I think we're better off having those conversations now about sort of what does this really mean.
Well, it's better for us now because of our strategic planning process.
Right, exactly.
So it's, I chose to raise the issue now and then duck to so that we could begin the conversation. And, you know, if at the end of the day it goes in a different direction, you know, all those points are valid. But I was struck by the quality of life study that has been done, some of the work that I've learned about through the economic development, and also our own environmental scan that we're doing of the peninsula as a component of our strategic plan. All of that plays into my thinking about, you know, I know we have a crisis to get through, but I also know that someday the crisis is going to be over. Are we going to be in the place we need to be to make sure that our kids are competitive? And that really does dominate a great deal of my thinking.
Mr. Farley.
Just to respond to your concept, and I'm not sure if I'm speaking as a council member or as a parent or as council's liaison to the EDA, because they all have a slightly different perspective on something like this, and they're all encouraged by it. Because what I view, and this is just my opinion, your role as superintendent is to help us be aware of what's possible. And I'm pretty confident that the people in this room will put plenty of fiscal constraints on that vision. But until we know what that vision is, I'd rather you not feel those constraints. Talk to us about what's possible, and then let us figure out what is possible from our end and how those two can best meet. And I'm struck by that comment that you highlighted for us about whether the student should fit the system or the system should fit the student. And there's always value in a student coming into a new environment and having to adapt, having to change, having all their comfort levels tested, and they do need to fit to some degree. Where I think the problem is, and I'm not trying to pick on semantics, it's the growth that how does the system help the student grow educationally? And when we move everybody along at the same level, I don't want to say we don't help most of those children grow the way that would best serve them. Some get pushed too quickly and can't keep up. Some get held back. And having an environment that creates flexibility takes that pressure off the teacher who's struggling to keep these who are being held back interested, and these who can't keep up from getting frustrated, and it creates all sorts of social dynamics within the classroom that are non-productive and cause the teacher not to be spending their time on actual instruction, but really on crowd management.
Right.
And so I don't know that we can afford it. I'm pretty sure we can't afford 4% a year, but I'm encouraged by you presenting us with the vision.
Are there other comments, or do you wish to go over anything else in the CIP, or?
I anticipated that was the big item.
Are there any other questions?
If there are other questions, we certainly are willing to take them, but
anything else on the CIP? Mr. Fuentes?
And not to belabor this, but to make sure, since I got on the board, there was always something in the CIP, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was those that were on there with me when I got on, was always on there about a new administration building for us, for a new central office. Part of it was what I was being told was the county needed the space, we needed more space, and we wanted to centralize our office. So that's always been on that CIP item, if I recall, has always been on there as a line item. The number was a little lower because I guess you go back 10 years or whatever, and now as we go, the escalated cost. We moved into Blair, and instantly all of us on the board, I don't think anybody, it was particularly those that were on the board when they moved in, would argue that the synergy of having a central office has improved efficiency in the schools division dramatically. It was dramatic change putting them, last year, the efficiency that we see from the administration. So we see that as a positive thing. So when we start talking about office spaces throughout, and I don't have a problem with us moving somewhere else. I mean, if that's what the answer ends up being, that's the answer. What I don't think the answer should be is that we move them in 10 different locations. Because then we become, I don't like to use the word, but you start to become dysfunctional. And we start having problems and inefficiency, and you'll never get to Premier when different groups can't talk to each other and that sort of stuff, as much as you have that electronic technology. The thing that struck me the other night, or it came up for briefly at 2 meetings ago. I think the superintendent brought it up because I'm not quite there yet, but when he brought up and made the point of building the school on site, and the approach, as Mr. Freeling says, it was refreshing that he came with a different approach to solving the problem that I was not expecting. And I don't know how well it was articulated just now, whether anybody picked up on the idea of maintaining Blair and on the same site putting possibly, this is one thought I think, is possibly building on the same site so that there's no land cost, and then there's additional synergies of having central office there with possibly this new concept. In fact, one of the concepts goes to what Ms. Jones says. My new concept school is a school that uses paper and pencil and blackboards. I would like to see that new concept school put in, kind of like people saying Latin is dead, you know, but it never goes away. Pens and paper never go away. Anyway, I throw that out as my last thought. Thank you.
Is there any further business?
I have a quick question. I know you all discussed the middle school athletics program, and I know there's a question, based on your discussion, a question as to whether or not the other localities are going to be keeping them or going to intramural, and I didn't know what timeline, because I certainly am a strong supporter of maintaining the middle school athletic program, because we all know that keeping the young people active and physically fit is a big part of their success in school as well, and I was just curious as to what your timeline was.
Well, that's a great question. There's a superintendent's meeting, a region superintendent's meeting this morning that Dr. Lindsay is attending on my behalf, in which that's one of the, this is Steve's opinion. Everybody's waiting for somebody to pull the trigger. Nobody wants to do it. You know, and York is asking what we're doing, and we're asking what they're doing, and
Tell them we are keeping
well,
the middle school sports program.
That's when I announced the recommendation of the change. That may or may not have influenced the other schools. We simply don't know, and their communities are going through the very same kinds of processes that we're going through. But we heard loud and clear from the time of the budget proposal until last night that that was an important part of our community, and if there was a way to try to salvage it, and that's what we did.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than having your daughter as a 7th grader going out for middle school softball and her coming home every day and saying, well, if I don't make it, Mom, there's always next year. And Mom's going, oh, gosh, this is terrible. So believe me, I've heard it loud and clear in my own house. So anyway, is there any further business? We appreciate very much all of you taking the time. I know everybody puts in a lot of time at meetings and a lot of time doing other community things. But I think this coming together and discussion is so important to the future of our school division, and very much appreciate the input and that you give us, and I want to thank you for that today. If there's no further business, I'll adjourn this meeting of the Williamsburg James City County School Board.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I did. Yes, I forgot that part. Go ahead.
Move to adjourn to Tuesday, March 13th at 7 p.m.
Mr. Minow, we have a motion on the floor. Would you please call the roll?
Mr. Valetta. Aye. Mr. Eisenhower. Ms. Jones.
Aye.
I need a motion to adjourn the Williamsburg City Council. I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Foster. Ms. Knudsen. Mayor Hallman. Aye.
Mr. Pons, Mr. Fryling.
Meeting adjourned.